Jean-Paul Riopelle said, I am convinced that the guy who goes on doing what he wants to do cannot go unnoticed. It's constancy that counts, even in stupidity. I don't know what I'll do tomorrow, but I will do nothing to please the clientele.
I didn't move to Europe. I got involved with a painter.
Who was?
Who lived there.
Right. Who was that?
He's a Canadian painter, French-Canadian painter.
He doesn't have a name?
Of course. Well, I was his mistress.
Oh, I see.
Shall we make a movie on him? Let's do it. It's kind of cozy. I was his mistress.
Je t'ai déjà dit, la peinture, c'est une maladie. On attrape, et c'est tout. Comment faire? Et c'est incurable, malheureusement.
He said it was a disease, but I think it's the reverse. It was a cure. When he wasn't painting, that's when the disease struck.
I remember a studio he had in Montmartre, among others, where there was a little path of newspapers laid on the floor because otherwise you had to walk on, I don't know how many centimeters of paint. It was quite something. I remember that. He could hardly move without sticking to the ground as he walked.
Pour moi, c'est un grand souvenir. C'est un souvenir tellement... Tu vas me faire rigoler.
Vas-y, parle de la rue Durantais.
Mais je me souviens, en étant très là, et ça a vraiment été le choc, parce que je suppose qu'à l'époque, oui, le geste de Jean-Paul était tel qu'il devait s'en perdre dans tous les azimuts. Et
non, c'est parce que j'employais des couleurs pas chères.
Et tu pouvais te permettre de les gaspiller. Oui, c'est un... D'ailleurs, le gaspillage est un peu le fond de sa nature, mais ça, c'est une autre affaire. Seulement, c'était les grands tableaux des années 52, 53, 54.
Pourquoi ils étaient pas grands, après?
Non, mais c'était les premiers.
He came back absolutely radiant. I said, Jean-Paul, you did a red painting. I can tell. Very surprised, he said, how did you know? He was totally covered with red. In 3 days and 3 nights, he had worked like a maniac and got rid of the angst that had built up.
Ouais. Ça, là, c'est dripping. C'était jeté, c'était fait comme Pollock ou quoi à l'époque? Comment tu faisais? C'était la suite d'une masse sur le couteau. Ça. Ah, c'est fait avec le couteau? Quelquefois, il y a eu, là, il doit y en avoir encore un peu, une partie qui était faite au pinceau. Ah, moi j'ai cru que tu le prenais, que tu le jetais comme ça, par-dessus.
Il y en a eu.
Simplement.
Non, en général, c'est la suite de la trace au couteau. Évidemment, elle peut se perdre au plafond aussi.
Alors il faut prendre le tableau jusqu'au plafond.
Oui, ou alors il faut conserver le plafond.
I don't remember seeing him paint, but he often took me to his studio. What impressed me, because I was small, was the pot of tubes. I thought that was wonderful. Sometimes he'd ask me to find titles for his paintings. I didn't dare say anything, of course, because I was overawed. But no, I never saw him work. What I remember was the material he had. His tubes were almost sculptures, really. He never used a tube completely, as I remember. He didn't squeeze it all out as you would with a tube of toothpaste. They were always half full. It was like when he smoked a cigarette. It was always the first third, never the whole cigarette, so he could light another. So maybe he used half the paint in a tube so he could open another one. It must be that, I think.
Je ne pense pas que je puisse faire le spectacle. Je pense qu'en fait, j'aime pas me voir peindre moi-même. Et si je constate que je suis dans une condition de me critiquer, que la critique je la fasse après, pendant l'exécution, je m'arrête, je m'en vais.
Le fait de me reculer quand je peins, de me reculer, hein, le tableau est fini. Ou je le détruis, ou il est fini.
Parce que quand ça marche, ça marche. Quand ça marche pas, si je me recule pour voir si le tableau est bon, je m'en vais. J'aime beaucoup mieux la porte que le bistrot d'en face.
Parce qu'on me demandait combien de temps ça prend pour faire une toile. Je ne sais pas.
Aucune idée. Aucune idée. Pas de notion du temps.
J'entre souvent à l'atelier. J'entre presque tous les jours. J'y vais tous les jours. J'ouvre la porte, je la referme, je ne peux pas rien faire. Et quand ça marche, la question de temps ne compte plus. Je peux en sortir 10 heures après, 20 heures après, mais c'est dans un autre état.
Et j'ai jamais peint en fumant ni en buvant. Je peux pas. C'est pas là.
Quand il n'y a plus de couleur dans les tubes, tu es bien obligé de t'arrêter. Je ne sais pas faire l'autre chose. J'ai jamais su faire autre chose.
You really have to have seen him work to understand what it's like, because nothing else exists. He's totally involved in what he's doing. He abandons himself in his work. It's really very impressive.
Personally, I've always thought Jean Paul was like a geyser.
A volcano, combustion engine.
The sap of life.
Comme dans les tableaux de Riopelle de l'époque 1953, les vitres, les murs, le sol étaient éclaboussés de peinture. L'homme était jeune et beau. Quelle aubaine pour moi. Tout était photogénique. Pendant qu'il s'est absenté un moment, j'en profitais pour photographier le sol et les godasses. Hommage à Van Gogh.
Quand je suis venu en France du Canada, la première fois que j'ai vu la campagne française, je suis arrivé avec comme palefrenier sur un bateau à Rouen. J'ai remonté la Seine.
C'était une bonne introduction.
J'ai dit, ça, c'est chez moi. Je m'en fous. N'importe quoi, je resterai là. Je suis resté. L'idée, c'était plutôt Paris. C'était même indispensable. Dans l'espoir.
Il a trouvé un Paris extraordinaire.
The Paris he found was extraordinary. Those were the years after the liberation. We all had the wonderful, unique chance to live in a time of total freedom. Total freedom because everyone, every single person, wanted to be free. And the authorities, and the police in particular, had collaborated so much that now they kept their traps shut. It truly was an atmosphere of extraordinary serenity and freedom.
Pourquoi vivre plutôt à Paris qu'à New York? D'abord, il y a une question de langue qui est très importante. Je pouvais assez difficilement m'établir à New York, quoique j'y suis resté assez longtemps. Mais les contacts étaient plus faciles quand même avec les Parisiens. Parce que mes contacts avec les gens ne sont pas basés sur des contacts, comme on pourrait dire, abstraits dans le sens de... Je n'ai jamais cherché à fréquenter que des artistes. Et je préfère fréquenter les gens de la rue. Or, moi, le bougnotte du coin, c'était mon premier ami. Et comme il m'a accepté, ben, on peut dire que le français, pour moi, moyen. Après, il y a eu d'autres catégories de français qui sont greffées, mais je crois que le contact avec la rue était pour moi une chose vitale.
Les Trois Marronniers was a cafe at the corner of Rue de l'Université and Boulevard Saint-Germain. Georges de Thiel and I were sitting there. I don't remember if there was anyone else. And in the distance we saw someone coming toward us. Georges had set up a meeting, I think. I don't remember clearly. A gypsy came up to us, and it was Jean-Paul.
It was the Canadian moving in. He was very handsome in those days, very mysterious. At the same time, he looked a little Spanish, too. I don't know whether it was true or not, but he played the part a little.
Riopelle always said that he looked like an Indian. Finally, we realized he was an Indian. He behaved like a lumberjack. He told us about how he hunted bears and all sorts of things. You can't forget that side of him.
Once I saw an article in a reputable paper, an art journal, a magazine, where they said Riopelle was an Iroquois who had betrayed his race. That was really very funny.
I wouldn't say savage, but wild, yes. Very, not wounded, but knocked around, probably by a number of things in his life. And at the same time, he was charming and funny and joyous. But with something, a very strong affirmation of his selfhood.
He was a very dynamic man, very alive, very hungry for life. In fact, I think he expresses it perfectly in his painting. He couldn't stand anything restrictive. He had a sense, I mentioned freedom before. Well, he had a sense of nonconformism and exuberance, and he did it very well. He really had gusto. He was in dazzling physical condition, with a constitution that could survive anything. He really was a very, very dynamic person.
After the war, I think there were 2 or 3 important factors. Conditions dictated the atmosphere. Everyone was broke. It was a world with all of these people, poets, painters, writers, film actors, ballet dancers, stage actors. All these people created an extraordinary atmosphere. It was great. And if you were intelligent enough to enter into this world, it was wonderful.
Qu'est-ce que vous nous foutez là, monsieur Artaud? L'homme, quand on ne le tient pas, est un animal érotique. Il a en lui un tremblement inspiré. Une espèce de pulsation productrice de bêtes sans nombre, qui sont la forme que les anciens peuples terrestres attribuaient universellement à Dieu.
Moi, j'étais très ami, par exemple, avec un type comme Artaud. Artaud,
moi, j'ai toujours voulu que les gens d'ici, en théâtre, aillent avec Artaud, Roger Blin, toute cette équipe, Mario Cazares, tout. Ils ont toujours pensé que je bluffais parce que leur monde, c'est des dieux. Il n'y a pas de dieu là-dedans. De surréaliste, il n'y a pas un qui est un dieu. Il n'y en a pas un. C'est des gens, c'est des copains qu'on fréquente.
He tried to promote a new generation of surrealists. Remember, surrealism was very important at that time, just as it was in New York in the 40s. So it was still the intellectual and pictorial reference.
For me, it is the art of a master trapper. There are traps for traps. And once the traps are trapped, a high degree of freedom is attained.
We said what we thought. We argued. Among critics, we slammed each other in the papers. Between artists as well. And at least there was this sort of marvelous vitality. So in the gallery, like the one I had, where we exhibited all sorts of things, quite often people came, argued, even insulted each other. It was really something.
In the surrealist world, taking a position was a way of life. You had to be provocative, insulting. No, not insulting, scandalous to a certain extent.
L'automastique, c'est de la merde. Né de la merde. C'est assez automastique comme ça.
On the material level, it was no picnic. On the intellectual level, it was a banquet.
Perhaps we should mention the Galerie de la Dragonne, because Jean-Paul liked dens. He liked cramped spaces. That gallery was a den already. It was run by a wonderful woman. She was the one who welcomed Breton. Her name was Nina Dosset.
They showed me this work, and I didn't hesitate. It had a kind of breath of nature that flowed through it, a sort of rage for painting, for the substance itself. It even had its own smell, because there was a lot of paint. But Riopelle's work was strong, violent, so it got violent reactions. As for me, I liked it.
When Jean-Paul was at his lowest ebb financially, and remember, Jean-Paul had responsibilities, and his family was literally foundering physically, he was ready to give up and go back to Canada. I realize now that that must have cost him an utterly unimaginable moral struggle. He had almost promised my father, if it doesn't work out, okay, I'll go home and then we'll see. And just the way that bell has just rung, a gong rang, and his life was transformed.
Au moment où ça allait le plus mal, je n'avais ni atelier, parce que je n'avais plus d'atelier, je n'avais pas de galerie, je venais de faire une exposition auquel je n'avais rien vendu. J'ai une amie qui est sculpteur, qui me dit, j'ai fait une exposition dans une galerie peu connue, je fais de la sculpture, j'aime bien ta peinture, tu ne mettrais pas de la peinture au mur. Alors je réponds, pourquoi je réexposerais les mêmes toiles que dans la même galerie? Les gens ont vu, je n'ai rien vendu. Elle me dit, oh ça me plaît, je paierai le catalogue, j'ai un ami qui fait la préface. Et le jour du vernissage, est arrivé un marchand de tableaux qui me connaissait, elle me dit, j'aime beaucoup ce que vous faites. Alors, je le regarde, je dis, écoutez, ça fait 7 ou 8 ans que vous me dites ça, moi je le sais. Hein. Elle me dit, non, je suis très sérieux, j'achète tout. J'ai dit, c'est curieux, c'est comme ça. Tant mieux. Hein.
It's a tiny gallery, but it was the one that people talked about the most. It was avant-garde, and it had been there since the 20s. All the most famous artists in Paris had exhibited there. It started with the Impressionists, then came Miro and Picasso, even Soutine.
Il était suivi d'un de ses amis qui me dit, monsieur, avez-vous besoin d'un atelier? Alors j'ai dit, là, il y a quelque chose qui tourne pas rond. Il me dit, je pars en Égypte demain, passez au 52 rue du Rantin, la clé est là, et je reviens dans 6 mois. Je suis resté 3 ans dans l'atelier. C'est magnifique, ça.
Shirley called me up, and I said, well, come to the hotel. She said, no, you have to get up and out. Now I'm in Saint-Germain with people. She said, you have to. So I went out and didn't want to go. And there was Riopelle. I never wanted to move here, but you do what the man wants. Don't you, sweet?
But what exactly did he want? The mad surrealist love preached by Breton destroyed his marriage. Faithful to love, but unfaithful to the women he loved. At 32, he was at the summit of his art. And yet he was consumed with doubt. Was there a life after mosaics?
He could never stand even the suggestion that he might redo something he had already done. It drove him crazy.
She was American, beautiful and untamed. Joan Mitchell, his muse and his rival. And the mosaics exploded and spattered his life with violence.
You couldn't stand the idea of saying he was working. When you say he's a playboy, he'd agree. He presented his life like an unending round of pleasure, to be spent seeing friends, drinking, and laughing, that his work had nothing to do with what seemed to concern him, while in fact his work was his only concern.
When I met Jean-Paul in 1960, he was becoming very famous. It was in '62 that he won the Venice Biennale Prize, and then the dealers started chasing him. He was really one of the first like that in France to enter the international system, you might say, in great demand. Very great demand. I remember there were dealers who waited for him here in the street, Canadian dealers, who were after him because his work was already selling very well in Canada. There was a sort of a boom with no limits. You felt that money dripped from his fingers. It was very impressive.
He was one of the most talked about painters of his generation in Paris. His canvases cost more than a Giacometti and sold very, very well. He was a character, a pleasant person too, and surprising. Sometimes he didn't talk, but it was great fun when he did. It was always an event, a show.
You sometimes had the impression he was playing Monopoly. No, his pockets were stuffed with money.
I mean, he gave it away. He always treated everyone. It was generosity gone wild. I don't know, maybe he wanted to get rid of it. In any case, he didn't think money was to be kept for a rainy day.
I still remember at the Bar Le Dôme or any bistro, he rarely sat down. He'd go and plant his hands on the bar and say, "What are we drinking?" Just like that, he'd do it.
The early 60s, they were very violent. Then I went into a hard time, I remember. Oh gosh, the bad Well, it's not to remember.
I think that he and Joan both plunged into a very strong relationship, very violent and closely linked to alcohol.
They call me sauvage in Europe, so I take it on. Because I'm direct and I don't speak, I say what I think, and you're not supposed to. You're supposed to be diplomatic, which I call hypocrisy and lying, really.
I think there was a force between the two that produced something huge. I don't know, but I warned many people, watch out with Joan and Jean-Paul. Be careful. You could end up a thin sliver of ham slammed between two thick slabs of bread, like this.
They were like two locomotives meeting head-on the same track. It was crazy. She was totally crazy, and so was Jean-Paul. And they complemented each other's lunacy. It was quite a sight. They fought with each other all the time, but Joan went on working, and so did Jean-Paul.
Close relationships like that are not easy between painters. They're so physically committed to their work that they aren't selfish, but they can be egocentric sometimes. Basically, it's in your work that your generosity shows, but because of their strength, which often showed itself in physical confrontations between them, whenever I saw them together, I never, ever saw them as anything but perfectly matched.
That was the time of the Rosebud? The bar Le Dôme? Giacometti and Beckett were there all the time, and people like that. Jean-Paul was a close friend of Beckett, and above all of Giacometti. Giacometti was an odd person. I mean, really odd.
He wasn't just loyal to his friends, he thought they were the cream of the crop. He was unconditionally faithful to them. His car dealer was the best car dealer. His fly tyer tied the best fishing flies in the world. Captain Storm, who flew the seaplane he shared with Champlain Charret, really was the greatest pilot in the world. That's how he was.
That need to be center stage, I think it's simple. He just wanted to be loved. That was the basic need. He wanted people to love him, and he was ready to pay for it, both with his money and his person, you might say. Because he also really liked to please. I mean, he wanted to be loved.
He was quite a dandy.
He was a true prince.
He looked like a hobo.
He would live in the most unbridled luxury when he could, and also in the most ostentatious poverty, if I can put it that way. He couldn't have cared less.
People always portray Riopelle as a man who made money easily, a big spender who lived a supposedly ideal life, but professionally, I always saw him work in extremely austere, ascetic conditions. He never had a luxurious studio, he never had an assistant to hand him his brushes. Wherever he worked, it was always very Spartan.
Ça a toujours été très spartiate, les endroits où il a travaillé.
Jean-Paul was very useful to her. In Montparnasse and in the artistic community, she always played the bohemian, but she was very rich.
Enormously rich. Enormously. Joan had a portfolio of her own, paintings aside, worth $40,000. I mean, $40 million. Not bad.
Joan was, after all, part of the aristocracy of American art. She knew de Kooning, she knew Pollock, and she introduced him to all those people. She took him into a world that he didn't know, that was basically rather closed.
What slowed him down was that he probably didn't know how to manage his image, as we say today, to build the stereotype of an artist. He lived like a painter. He went sailing, he raced cars, but he never built a solid image as a painter. From that point of view, if you compare him to a genius of the 20th century, but I'm sure Picasso carefully built a strong image as an artist, be it only in his relations with photographers. As for Riopelle, he preferred to live and didn't worry about building a Riopelle stereotype and a glamorous image, what we would describe these days as media-friendly. It wasn't the time yet, but it was coming.
Je considère la télévision, le cinéma, la presse, le journalisme comme un des grands moyens modernes d'avilissement et de crétinisation des foules. Mais j'adore les utiliser parce que, au point de vue pratique, après, il n'y a plus de gens qui courent après Dali et les tableaux se vendent plus cher.
Si on parlait un peu peinture, qu'est-ce que t'en penses, toi?
Alors, cameraman, you want a beer? Love you.
S'il vous plaît, je peux avoir un verre encore? Ça a duré...
Someone would say, let's go to the station. So we'd go to the station. We brought people here without warning them. They'd start, particularly the chatty ones, the smooth talkers. It delighted him. The conversation would begin, and all of a sudden, Jean-Paul would split his sides laughing. I don't know how many times that happened. It happened with the Matisses, with all sorts of friends.
Comment pourriez-vous décrire en des mots simples le travail que vous avez effectué au cours des dizaines et des dizaines d'années?
Peindre, c'est manger, dormir, et il a rajouté chier. Voilà.
Merci bien, monsieur.
Merci. À la prochaine.
Si on a évolué.
I think that man has always appeared in my canvases. Men still do. If they weren't in my painting, it would be abstract, and I never did a single abstract work. In the canvases from the 50s and 60s, few people can spot any objects in my paintings, but that's all the better. There's no reason why you should see the duck I put in there.
Oui, mais une feuille d'arbre, ça suffit. Hein, c'est toute une forêt. Le tout, c'est de la voir. Alors, dans la conception que moi j'ai de ça, c'est pas l'abstraction, mais c'est d'aller d'un geste libre, enfin, je ne parlerai pas d'automatisme, vers ça, et d'essayer de comprendre ce qu'est la nature à partir, non pas de la description de la nature, mais vers. Abstrait, ça veut dire venir d'eux, non? Donc, il n'y a pas de peinture abstraite. Si elle vient de quelque chose, elle n'est pas abstraite dans l'esprit des gens qui parlent abstraction.
As far as Jean-Paul is concerned, I didn't consider him a total abstractionist.
That's true. He's not a total abstractionist.
In his painting, right? Not in his head.
It's true, when you look at a canvas, his posters and the lithos, they aren't total abstracts. There's always a little bit of figuration. It's slightly figurative.
Personally, I think he's unclassifiable. Unclassifiable, you might say.
It's Riopelle. That's called Riopelle.
Now that's fame. It's a little like champagne. It's happy, right?
Alors, impressionniste. Dépressionniste. Moi, j'espère toujours que le tableau que je fais fait la somme. C'est-à-dire que c'est le plus beau, c'est le meilleur, c'est le définitif. Quand je le termine, je m'aperçois qu'il ressemble toujours à celui qui précède Et définitive, ma foi, ben non, j'en attraque un autre, quoi. J'espère toujours que le premier trait que je fais, où je commence par une masse de couleurs, n'importe où, n'importe comment, mais je peux pas dire que je commence en bas, je commence en haut, au milieu, ou n'importe où, n'importe quelle couleur. Pour moi, elle devrait être suffisante. Elle est, pour moi, probablement pas tellement suffisante, puisque ça arrive à faire des épaisseurs énormes. Mais j'ai jamais voulu peindre épais. Jamais j'ai fait de l'épaisseur pour l'épaisseur. Pour moi. Mais j'arrive pas à trouver le moment où j'en suis satisfait. Donc, j'en rajoute, j'en rajoute, j'en rajoute. Quand je peindrai mieux, j'en ferai moins épais.
That's a radical transition. We reach the ultimate transparency, something that is truly almost crystal. When he began, we saw a sort of carnal, concrete thickness. He has moved from matter to the immaterial. It's very luminous, a totally personal light. It's not a lighting effect. It's a sort of diffusion of feeling that creates a light, that creates a personal thing. It's the root of his originality, in a way. Like Jean-Paul's most recent works, it's striking. He reaches the climax of that point of view. He was strongly criticized in France when he stopped painting with thick substances, but it's a wonderful development and very, very positive. All of a sudden, he acquired a whole new vocabulary. That's the sign of a great creator. He doesn't need to refer to what he did before.
What throws people off, what they often don't understand, is that physically he is unable to paint in oils, because he can only paint with oils standing up, and that's very tiring. He can't do it anymore. Since he still needed to express himself, to work, he invented a whole technique tailored to his physical condition. So he works flat, with little spray cans and so on. Starting from there, using all the means he has, certainly he is creating works that can't help but be different. They're wild and full of inventiveness, and they're produced by someone who is ill and weak and reinventing everything. I think it's admirable. Jean-Paul ranks creation very high. He's someone, basically, he's a sort of a mystic of painting. So he never wanted painting to be a habit. He always wanted to preserve this freshness he has in his passionate relationship with painting. So very often, he didn't paint for months, even years. Believe me, it happened. I saw him stop painting for maybe 2 or 3 years.
Les gens diront s'il fait toujours la même chose, c'est beaucoup moins bon. On aimait beaucoup ce que vous faisiez, c'est toujours la même chose. Ou alors, ils diront, oui, on aimait beaucoup. On s'aperçoit toujours qu'ils aiment ce qui était dans le passé. pour les gens vraiment intéressés à l'art, de ce qu'un type va devenir, tu sais, ça se compte sur les doigts de la main. Avec mon âge, je suis considéré comme un vieux peintre académique par rapport à la jeune génération.
In France, I'm an American gestural painter, which is and lyric on top of it, very pejorative. And here I'm Frenchy because I have color and then decorative. Ooh, ooh. So you can't win, honey. And on top of it all, I'm a girl, a woman, female.
I think they totally believed in each other's work, and I think they helped each other. I think kept each other going because, you know, that time in the art world, conceptual work and pop art and all kinds of things were kind of very quickly coming up and erasing the immediate past. And things didn't look good, you know, and he knew what was coming, and they worked very hard to keep each other going.
Nevertheless, I think he had this great courage, and not all that many painters had it, even the most gifted, to perpetually take the risk, question everything done before. And we can see the result. He's an alchemist.
I have the impression that in more recent years, what distinguishes the second part of his work from the first is this gift of storytelling that appeared first in his sculpture. Now he's doing something he didn't do in his earlier period, where sometimes there were recognizable shapes, the outline of a mountain or something, but it was an illusion.
C'était une illusion.
Mais qu'est-ce que tu vas faire là maintenant? Tu veux travailler là? Je sais pas. Tu sais jamais, toi. Si on me dit il y a un contrat ou cette affaire pour telle date, je le fais pas. Il n'y en a pas de question. Dites-moi ce que vous voulez, puis si ça marche, tant mieux. Si ça marche pas, tant pis pour moi.
C'est la première fois que la musique me plaît. Là, c'est super.
C'est bon, hein? Ça va arranger un peu votre film. Voilà.
There are great similarities between Eskimo art and Riopelle's art. Eskimo art is basically the art of the shamans. What people call the master of ecstasy is the one who provides a channel between the visible and invisible worlds. He is the one who masters fire, masters communication with spirits, with the dead, with animal spirits, with the sky, with space. He organizes all the religious and ritual life of the community. Riopelle is very close to that approach.
C'est pour des explications ou pour l'évêché, c'est au fou folle? C'est des explications alors. Tout ce que je peux dire, c'est que le seul jeu de ficelle que je connaisse, c'est Twic, 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 ou Monsieur Marquet, les oiseaux s'envolent. Tu prends un bout, hein? C'est ça. Et tu tires dessus. Twic, twic, twic. Et tous les oiseaux sont partis.
He was my 24-year live-in, okay? And then he took off with a dog sitter. That's the way it was.
Physically, he looked like a bear, but handsome, wonderfully handsome, and so tender and sensitive and kind, truly kind.
Je pense que
Le chapeau de la dame pouvait être bien garni. Bonjour, madame.
Il était He was so romantic and sort of worshipful.
Joan expressed their separation in the gestural rage of her work, whereas for Jean-Paul, that was really the same time he started using only 2 or 3 colors, black and white, and he always said that, in any case, white was the color of death, and so, in a way, of separation. The third color he added was in les sanguines. He used charcoal and red chalk. So there are 3 colors highly charged with meaning. It's true that Jean-Paul was one of the greatest colorists. It wasn't just by chance that he dropped all the other colors.
His inspiration was totally bound to the woman in his life. I mean, he could change. It's surreal. You have to understand the surrealist morality. That's it exactly, a question of surrealist morality. So it isn't in the depiction, but in the Jean-Paul, whatever he does, it's always for a woman.
Combien? Une vingtaine, mais avec un peu. Oh, tu peux faire un joueur.
Oui, on sait jamais.
Ça arrive, c'est déjà arrivé.
C'est déjà arrivé.
I think it happens to a lot of people when we age a little. We're looking for our roots. We needed to leave to do something else. But afterwards, we come back. I think that's what it is. Je crois que c'est ça.
Alors la nature pour moi, c'est les médias de la saison, du détail, et ça m'intéresse, qui me permet de jamais m'ennuyer quand je suis en pleine nature.
Il veut embrasser. He wants to embrace the geese, the animals, everything. He wants to stroke the fish. All that he told me was that his other life wasn't there anymore.
That's why you found yourselves alone on the ship with the retinue gone?
Yes.
Hollis is a wonderful woman. I think she was. Those were some of the times when we found Jean-Paul in good health again. Glad to be alive, laughing, until eventually it got worse again.
On the one hand, violent, anxious, driven, whatever you like. And on the other hand, motherly, careful, watching out for his daughters and so on. That's a very unexpected side to him, the teddy bear. Jean-Paul really is a teddy bear. That's how he is, always two-sided.
In reality, he wasn't simple at all. No. But who is? No, not simple.
But there's the other side as well. There's the darkness, of course.
We decided to come to l'Île aux Oies because it was the hunting season. It was like a holiday. We came to take advantage of the light here because Jean-Paul thinks it's superb. He thinks that after the light of the Seine, this is the most beautiful. Joan's death blew all that to pieces. At first, Jean-Paul didn't talk at all while he was doing Rosa Luxemburg. I think he was in too much pain. Those first days in the house were very quiet. It was silent and full of pain. Jean-Paul hadn't worked for about a year. He didn't feel well. Joan's death was a great shock to him, and it gave him an energy that he found in his pain, and I think a desire to record the important things that happened in his life. Everything he had lost throughout his life, all the deaths and the separations.
He can't talk, he can't weep. There's nothing else he can do. His pain has to come out. It grew and grew. He called Joan Rosa Luxemburg.
Joan Rosa Luxemburg.
You have to work through Jean-Paul. You have to experience his feelings, live through what he lived through. That way, you'll get closest to the truth, because it's not outside him. He's still there. He called it his will and testament, so he really believes that that's his life. That's where he wrote the story of his life.
En tout cas, vos dernières toiles sont tellement vivantes. Il y a une telle énergie.
Ça, c'est l'énergie du désespoir.
Si vous restait une année à vivre, qu'est-ce que vous feriez?
J'essaierai de la prolonger.
I think an artist can't evolve all that much. He takes one step. If he takes two, that's wonderful.
Alors on boit un coup à la santé de Jean-Paul.
Allez, à Jean-Paul.
À Jean-Paul.
Allez, à Jean-Paul.
Ça va pas d'âge.
J'étais pas très frais, quoi. J'avais pas l'œil frais.
Pas très.
On va passer à table. On va regarder qu'est-ce qu'il y a à manger au menu. As-tu le goût?
Non.